Hey everybody, this is Paul. Real quick before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know that I have launched a new newsletter called Local News Industry Pulse. And it is a briefing of news, policy, trends, and more in the local news industry straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you're enjoying the content I'm putting out with the podcast, I think you would also get a lot of value from the newsletter. So if you have a minute, go subscribe really quick to Local News Industry Pulse. You can scroll down in your podcast app and click on the link at the very bottom of the show notes right now, or go to localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com. That's localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com/subscribe, and you can sign up there and stay informed on everything that's going on in the local news industry every Thursday. All right, thanks. Let's get into today's episode.
Pace of change and disruption is just accelerated. It's like moving so fast it makes your head spin. It's like trying to rebuild your car while you're driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour. I think the message is we just have to constantly innovate, pay attention to what's going on in the market, pay attention to what consumers are looking for, and make sure we continue to change and innovate as the market does.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gawertis. Small Press, Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. Okay, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Fran Wills. Fran is the CEO of the Local Media Consortium. The Local Media Consortium, or LMC, delivers economic value through strategic partnerships and initiatives on behalf of over 90 local media companies across the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico, and includes more than 5,000 news outlets. But we'll get into that in a minute. Fran, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Glad to be here, Paul.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into the rest of the questions, can you give us just a quick, brief bio on your career, your life and career, and how you kind of came to your position at the LMC?
Sure. So local media and publishing is kind of in my DNA. In 1888, my great-grandfather founded a weekly newspaper in rural Missouri called the Perry Enterprise. So as a child, I was working after school at the newspaper and then continued on being like the editor of the high school newspaper and yearbook. Then I went to Mizzou, got my journalism degree, and started out on the retail side of the business, buying newspaper and broadcast. Then I got into the media business side of the business in the early 2000s, leading marketing and digital for the Denver Newspaper Agency, the Dallas Morning News, and Cox Media Group prior to joining the LMC in 2016. So you might say local journalism is family tradition and a passion.
I've had some folks on here, and they say, I've been in the local news ecosystem forever, like back to high school. Most of them don't go back to 1888, so that is in the blood, definitely. Could you give us a quick overview? Because let me preface this: I've mentioned this. I'm sure podcast listeners are tired of hearing it, but I don't have a journalism background. I'm from the podcasting world and audio world. So I try and approach this as kind of an outsider looking in. So for someone who doesn't know about the Local Media Consortium, can you just give us a quick overview of what it is and what it provides, a little beyond what I kind of mentioned at the top of the episode for members and partners?
Sure. So we were founded in 2013 really as a way to provide more economic benefit to local media companies on the digital side of their business. As you said, we represent a lot of media companies. It's actually grown from 90 to 155 in the last few years. And those 155 media companies represent thousands of local news outlets across the U.S. and Canada. And we basically take our collective member scale and negotiate partnerships with digital technology and service providers to negotiate deals that our members would likely not be able to get on their own. So it's kind of like group purchasing, where we are bringing our scale of all of our members to partners and being able to really negotiate more favorable terms.
So on the publisher side, it basically offers them a better price point or offer, whatever the service may be for them. And then I'm guessing for the member or I'm going to get confused, the member side, partner side, it just offers them more scale. Is that kind of what's attractive on their side, and access just to more, especially if it's a lot of software companies and things like that, scale is attractive, I know.
Yeah, exactly right. So, it's pretty sizable economic benefit for our members. Last year we delivered about $60 million worth of benefit to our members. And to our partners, it provides them a way to basically grow their business with local media companies without having to negotiate, 150 different contracts. It saves them a lot in expense on the biz dev and marketing and legal side to try to connect partners and members so that there's more success and more benefit on both sides of the fence.
Okay, awesome. So the LMC was founded in 2013. Did you join it in 2018, or is that when you became CEO? I might have my numbers incorrect there.
I joined actually in 2016.
Okay.
As the CEO.
Okay. So in that time, so you've been there 6, 7, 8 years, something along there. I don't like doing public math. How have you seen, because it was already well into the kind of the crisis, I guess you could say, in the local news industry, but also pre-pandemic and now through the pandemic and now post, which is also almost a different kind of era, if you will. How have you seen, from your vantage point within the Local Media Consortium, seen the ecosystem change during your time there? What are the big changes you've seen from a business standpoint, or just trends in general?
Well, the pace of change and disruption is just accelerated. It's like moving so fast it makes your head spin. It's like trying to rebuild your car while you're driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour. So I would say the biggest change is just the volume of fragmentation with consumers. So there's thousands of distribution channels, thousands of ways consumers can consume news and information. There's just the amount of distribution channels and the volume of distribution channels is just becoming vast. And so instead of consumers going directly to a news site, now they, access news through Google search or social media platforms. And video has definitely increased in popularity, both with consumers and advertisers. So there's a lot of migration going to kind of native video platforms like YouTube and TikTok. And now there's the rise of CTV and fast channels. So, if you're a local media company that was established 100 years ago, and even if you, kind of nailed the digital disruption that happened in the early 2000s, now you're having to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. And of course, the buzz around the entire industry is about AI. So now we're having to figure out, how AI is going to impact both our audience and our business, and how we deal with that new challenge on the horizon.
So in short, everything has changed in that time, from the sounds of it, or a large chunk of the whole business. That's kind of what I thought. I just like hearing different people's perspective from different, vantage points. Let's move on to talk about the members of the Local Media Consortium. What's a typical member look like? Is it just, I think you mentioned, I don't know if in this conversation or if the other podcasts I listen to you with, TV stations, but what's a typical member look like? What's the size you're looking at of the local publishers, and just the kind of anything about them, business model, structure, primary distribution, around that?
So first and foremost, we serve local media companies that have journalists in local markets. So we don't service national news outlets like the New York Times or Washington Post or CNN. We only support media companies that have local TV stations or local newspapers, and we serve media companies of all types, so newspaper, TV, radio, and online only as well. And we service really large multi-market companies like Lee and McClatchy Media News Group on the newspaper side, as well as Scripps and Tegna and Nexstar on the broadcast side. But we also serve really small news outlets. And for a lot of them, we provide free membership through associations like Lion and NAHP and AAN so that they can take advantage and have access to all of LMC's partners and services without having to pay a membership fee.
Okay, that definitely helps clarify it for me. Clarify it, that they have to have journalists working in the local field. That makes total sense. So that kind of narrows it down. So from there, it could be a pretty broad scale. And you kind of talked about this. I was wondering if all members are traditional news orgs, or are there any new? I've been seeing just with this podcast, kind of some new, more innovative business models. I've even seen like social media native organizations. One trend I've been seeing a lot is hyper local and local newsletters, like just even curated or independently reporting newsletters, podcasts, YouTube channels, etc. Are those kind of things supported too, or what's the criteria to be accepted as a local news member?
So we have a growing number of innovative non-traditional newsrooms like On Milwaukee, the Baltimore Banner, or the Memphian, which are digital native news outlets that don't have a legacy print or broadcast background. And through some of the associations that we offer our membership through, there are diversity in those news outlets. They are supporting really small online or newsletter or social media newsrooms that emerging and starting to have some success.
Okay. That's great, because I think just getting into this podcast. I started this podcast, and I think I started recording in January or something. It's been live since March. Something, don't quote me on that. Something along those lines. So I'm a newcomer to the whole industry at large, and I'm trying to kind of get my footing still, and I'm learning more all the time. But just doing this podcast, I've seen a lot of that, and that's kind of the question behind this podcast: is how can people innovate? What's working? What isn't? What can we, build on that's been working for 100 years, and what maybe doesn't work so well anymore. So, that's cool that there's more innovative stuff going on with your members also. What about partners? And do I have the terminology wrong here? The members are the newsrooms, and the partners would be like the businesses you're working with, right? Okay, sorry. I had this nagging feeling that I had it backwards the whole time, but
no, we definitely are representing the local media companies, and those are our members.
I see.
We're a member-based organization. We're actually owned by our.
Okay, and what's the structure? Actually, this wasn't in my list, but and it's probably on your website. I don't have it handy. Is it LMC a nonprofit? Is it a for-profit organization? It's just
we are a for-profit organization.
Okay.
However, we function a lot like a nonprofit.
Okay.
We are a member-based organization, so all of our members, except for the really small media companies, pay annual dues. And those dues are based on just our cost structure.
I see.
And we just look to cover our costs every year, and all the value and benefit that we are able to negotiate actually all goes back to our members.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. A for-profit that functions like a nonprofit. It's funny. I had Stephen Waldman on the podcast from Rebuild Local News, I believe. Right, and one of his main takeaways in the podcast, he was more talking about just publishers in the space, is that he thinks nonprofits need to act more like for-profits and vice versa. So it's interesting that it's kind of a similar setup with your organization. So anyway, back to the partners. Who's a good fit to be an LMC partner? If there's somebody out there listening working at a bigger company, or do you work with like smaller agencies, or is it mostly software providers? Who's a typical LMC partner?
Typical are digital tool and technology providers. So think all the technology and software that a media company needs to run their websites and all their digital assets, their mobile, their social. So all those tools and technology, from ad serving to CDPs to CMPs, pick your acronym, all the infrastructure they need to run their digital business. That's our primary, partners. We also have partners that help with revenue generation. So they help with content distribution and help our members increase their revenue, particularly advertising revenue. And, we work with our partners to provide a really streamlined way to really grow their business with local media companies through a single point of contact and a single contract. So we negotiate a contract between the LMC and the partner. And then if our members want to participate, we connect that partner with a member and they take it from there. So the LMC doesn't get involved in any of the financial transactions or onboarding. We are simply negotiating the terms and the pricing for the contract, which is a big benefit to our partners because it saves them time, reduces a lot of their expenses around biz dev and legal. And we also do a lot to promote our partners to our members because we measure our success by how many members are engaging with our partners, because by doing that, both of them receive economic benefit. So that's what we're.
And how are you finding your partners? Are they finding you? Are you kind of on the lookout for people that might be a good fit and approaching those companies? How's that typically work out?
So we get a lot of feedback from our members. We have working groups and committees, different types of members, and they provide a lot of feedback on some new partners they're exploring, or they've got a particular area of their business where they would like to see a new piece of technology. Obviously, we're focused a lot right now on AI and data management. So all the things that you hear about that are happening in the digital space, we're likely working on a partnership around that.
Today's episode is sponsored by localpod.co. LocalPod offers podcast production and consulting for local news organizations and only local news organizations. LocalPod creates weekly news podcasts based off of the top stories from your publication. You provide the script, we handle the rest. We narrate your news, edit it, produce it with a custom intro and outro with music, and distribute the podcast to all available podcast apps. Your listeners will see your branding and hear your content in their podcast feed, just like wherever you're listening to right now. Podcasts are one of the most engaging digital formats, which is why we can also help you monetize your podcast as well. We offer custom ad reads for your podcast, and we can also set up subscriptions so that you can monetize your audience directly. Have you thought of launching a podcast but want to control it in-house? We can help you with that too. LocalPod offers podcast coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one coaching calls, along with the actionable steps you need to launch a successful revenue-generating podcast of your own. To find out more, visit localpod.co. That's localpod.co. Or just click on the link in the episode show notes in your podcast app. All right, back to the show.
And then another question that kind of popped up when we were talking about it. Do you typically, when you're looking at companies to partner with, are they typically more established, kind of proven companies, or are you working with like newer startups, especially with AI? A lot of stuff is just so new, and I don't want to say unproven, but maybe just, hasn't been around as long. Is there any kind of vetting process or anything like that? Or how's that work?
So I would say we do a bit of both. We do partnerships in some fairly mature pieces of the business, like a data management. We're working on a data management contract right now, which is, it's been around a few years. So that's a more established arena. But we're also talking with AI companies that can help, streamline newsroom processes, help write headlines, or help optimize for SEO and tagging, as well as looking at, some AI partners on the business side that can help with sales and marketing, collateral and creative development. And in all of those cases, we vet the partners. We get references and talk to media companies that are using them or experimenting with them, and make sure that they have a solid reputation of doing what they say and providing good customer service and a quality product.
That makes sense. And it's kind of going back to what you were saying before. It makes sense to listen to your members and see what they're looking at, when they're interested in, and what actually benefits them too. Interesting. So I'm going to pivot away from the questions I sent you earlier, because as I mentioned before we started recording, I listened to another podcast that you were on, the It's All Journalism podcast, which came out maybe a week ago after I'd sent our interview prep, which was great listen. I can link to that in the show notes and everything if anybody wants to hear it. But kind of one of the themes of this show is, showcasing those different business models and trends and everything. And you talked a lot about video and how you're seeing a big move to video. Do you have any general thoughts about that you could speak to? And we could go from there, or what you're seeing from your members.
So, as the saying goes, you got to follow the eyeballs. According to Statistica, in 2024, it's projected that you're going to spend almost 100 minutes per day watching online videos, which is mind-boggling.
That is crazy.
Video content will make up 82% of internet traffic by 2025. So, if you want to remain relevant and be where the consumers are flocking to, everybody's got to get better and better at video. It was a top priority for our members in a recent survey that we did. So everybody, newspaper, radio, and TV alike, are looking at creating video and looking at all the new video distribution channels with CTV and fast channels. So there's definitely a focus for our members in devoting more content and resources to content creation and video, and then looking at more ways they can monetize it.
It's interesting to hear because I just keep hearing more and more of that with video. I'm a podcast producer. I'm always just so into audio, so I don't spend as much time paying attention to it. But where there's smoke, there's fire. So if that's where the eyeballs are, that's where you want to follow them too.
Some of our radio stations, they are actually videotaping their DJs having, doing their interviews and having conversations in their recording studios. They're videotaping those interactions and then releasing those videos on YouTube and other video distribution channels. So it's like they have a podcast or an audio distribution, but they're also videotaping that interaction and then, getting even more visibility to that through video.
I could see that being really powerful because, one of the most I don't spend much time on TikTok, but I look at Instagram Reels, I'll admit it, which is basically like TikTok, And one of the most common kind of formats you see is like the podcast, maybe a side shot of somebody with a microphone talking. So, if you're a radio station or if you have hours of audio content, man, there is like so many clips and stuff that could be repurposed there. And if you have somebody bring in maybe some younger folks or people that are more familiar with TikTok and get really good at that, I think that's a big area people should look at. I'm curious, are there any other areas you've seen growth? So one thing I've noticed in addition to video, so one thing I've seen doing the podcast is newsletters. It's just, they pop up everywhere. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing. I think I saw a report from, I believe it was Lion Publishers recently, that I think 90+% of their members are using newsletters now. And that's up like 30% since the pandemic or something. Some crazy numbers like that. Have you seen anything on that front?
Newsletters are just exploding with all of our members, whether they're newspaper or radio or TV, because everybody is really focused on how they can capture more first-party data or create a first-party relationship with a consumer, particularly with all the disruption that's happening around cookies and the advertising ecosystem. The more direct relationships that we can have with consumers, the better. So newsletters is a really great way to do that. So you get a lot of, and a lot of our members are experimenting with different kinds of newsletters based on interest in their local community. So the ones that are most successful are ones that are really focused in on what is local to their particular market, like Atlanta Journal-Constitution has like a Dog Nation newsletter and is also getting into video and podcasts around that. And KSL, which is a radio station out in Salt Lake, has developed newsletters and from that generated distribution on YouTube and has over 300,000 subscribers now. So just a lot of experimentation, tying in newsletters and then sprinkling into those newsletter podcasts and video to just increase time that consumers spend with their news content and also how much they're engaging.
That's what I thought I might hear. Thank you for kind of shining some light on that, because I just doing this podcast, I'm over and over and over every guest is newsletters. And guess what? I've started a newsletter. I've done it too. And it makes sense. I mean, you're bombarded by so much advertising and everything. And that inbox is like this thing. It's been around forever and it's just so trusted. You sign up for it, you know what you're getting. It's valuable. And then I've also heard people say the younger generation, Gen Z or whoever, Gen Alpha, they're not using email. And kind of what I've seen is like, yeah, until they get into the workforce, and then they're going to be using email. So it's just interesting that, and they're going to be using email. So do you have any kind of general thoughts on the direction of local news on the business side in 2024? I mean, we've kind of been talking about that. I'm just kind of running through my questions here. Any other additional trends or surprising things you've seen come up? Any interesting business models or interesting experiments you're seeing run?
So the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that no one way to increase your audience or grow your revenue will suffice. You've got to have multiple ways that you are growing your audience. You've got to be across all the different platforms to grow the audience, and same with advertising. So to your point earlier, even if you're a nonprofit and you primarily get funding through donations or grants, we're seeing some of our nonprofit members branching out into paid sponsorships or subscriptions for certain types of their content. So I would say that most of our members are just expanding the number of revenue streams they have and expanding their distribution channels, because it's just because there's so much fragmentation amongst advertisers and consumers that you've got to, you can no longer just survive on one way of doing business.
Yep, that's great feedback for anybody out there running a newsroom. I think I've gotten through most of my questions. What did I miss? What else is of burning importance? A message that you would like to get out there to, I don't know, anybody that may be a partner or a member or just interested in the space off the top of your head?
I think for local news outlets, what we're seeing is we've really got to get back to our roots of being trusted sources of local news in our markets, and really focused in on what the people in our market are interested in and how can we better serve them, and what's relevant to them. So for news outlets, you really have to listen to your audience and, make sure that you're developing content that's interesting to them. And on the business and revenue side, you first have to have audience in order to generate revenue, either through subscriptions or advertising. I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that small news outlets, as well as some of our larger multi-market outlets, their scale isn't big enough to be interesting or attractive to a lot of big brands and advertisers. So we've recently started this initiative called NewsPass ID that is bringing all of our members' inventory together as an offering, so that brands and agencies that are looking for scale, local news audiences at scale, they can buy through NewsPass ID. I think the message is we just have to constantly innovate, pay attention to what's going on in the market, pay attention to what consumers are looking for, and make sure we continue to change and innovate as the market does.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up that NewsPass ID. I just was kind of skimming it really quick right before we hopped on, and that is super interesting as well. And that was kind of just released, right? It looks like just the press release, at least, was just from a few days ago. Is that active now? Your members are utilizing that now, or has been before? Okay, interesting. And I'll link to that as well in the show notes, so people can read up on it in more detail. Also very cool. Okay, Fran, I think we covered everything. Where can listeners find out more? What do you want me to link to, or anything else you'd like to share or promote or connect with you or LMC?
So, I think if anybody is interested in learning more, they can go to localmediaconsortium.com or email me or any of our team, which is our first name at localmediaconsortium.com. So we're always interested in learning about what's going on in the industry, and always interested in how we can help more local media companies, create a better digital business model.
That's great. That's what I'm here for too with this podcast as well. And I'll link to all that in the show notes and in my new newsletter because, like we said, everybody's starting them. I'll link to it there as well. I've been linking to that.
Yeah, send me a call. I'll take a look at the newsletter.
All right. Thank you. All right, Fran. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.